Hello everyone, my name is Steph and I am a dietitian here at Get Going, and I'm very excited to be here tonight because I will be talking to you about iron and iron requirements for women. So it's in light of our Women's Health Week this week, so not sure if you've seen some of our other amazing lives and things that have happened on our stories and our posts this week from our other amazing dietitians and trainers here. If not, definitely go and check those out because there have been heaps of them and they're really, really great to have a look at. So, but today I will be covering all things iron. So I will touch on girls and women's iron requirements throughout their life stages and how the impact of iron deficiency has on things like performance and training. Also how to get adequate iron in your diet. And yeah, if anyone has any questions along the way, please ask them and I will do my best to answer them as I go, or I can do it at the end as well. So yeah, welcome everyone who's just joining in. Okay, so I'll get started. So first of all, what is iron? So iron is a mineral. It's a micronutrient that is an essential nutrient for our body, which means that we have to get that from our diet. So we can't actually make iron. So we need to eat foods that contain iron. So iron also has a number of roles in our body. And one of the major ones that it has is transporting oxygen around our body in our blood through the red blood cells. So iron helps with energy production also. And how it does that is that it helps transport that oxygen from the blood to our muscles and our cells to use. It also does play a role in our immunity also, so it helps with proper immune function. It is very, very important that we, as women, have enough iron as it is attached to the blood, and women who start menstruating or we have our periods, so it's definitely important that we get adequate amounts of iron because we do lose that through there. So in saying that, our iron needs also do increase quite substantially as well once we get to that menstruating age. And according to the previous survey in 2011-2012, so the health survey, about 40% of Australian women actually don't consume enough iron in our diet. So we're not meeting the needs that we have. So it's definitely important that we are eating enough iron for that reason, and because without eating enough iron, it can lead to things like iron deficiency or iron deficiency anemia. So it would be good to note, just going on that as well, that there are lots of different stages of iron deficiency, and these can only be found out through blood tests. So you do need to get a blood test to know if you are iron deficient. And if you are truly iron deficient, those are really important. So if you are suspecting you're low in iron, it's definitely something that you would need. I do touch on this a little bit later as well. I just wanted to flag it now. So if you do think that you're low, that a blood test is definitely needed. So before we get into all of that though, I do want to highlight what our requirements are. So for our different stages in life. Following on from the Australian guidelines, or the nutrient reference values, our daily intakes, so a recommended daily intake. So from as a child, 9 to 13, we need about 8 milligrams of iron. And then it does increase quite a bit from the age of about 14 to 18, which is typically when people start to have your periods, you start menstruating. So your iron requirements do increase quite a bit. So that goes up to 15 milligrams. And then from the ages of 19 to 50, our requirements go to 18 and they stay there for quite a number of years. So those are they call them childbearing years. So, you have your period, you're menstruating. So it's definitely important that you're getting adequate iron there. And then once you're going through menopause, so it's about the age of 51, when you go through menopause, that's when it goes back down to before when you were a child. So you go back down to those 8 milligrams. I will mention that although I'm not talking too much about pregnancy today, the requirements for pregnancy do go up to 27 milligrams. So that, as you can see, that's quite a significant increase. So that's also something to mention, but I won't really be touching too much on pregnancy today. So yeah, as you can see from that age of about 14 or when you start menstruating, there is quite a large increase in our requirements. So it's definitely important that we want to be making sure that we're eating enough iron through the food that we're having in our diet. So now that we know that, basically how are we going to get that? So what sort of foods have iron, and how are we going to know that we get enough? So I want to break iron up into two separate groups. So there's our animal iron or our heme iron, and then there's our plant-based iron, which is our non-heme iron. So basically they come from the non-heme, comes from our plant-based, so non-animal products. So the iron that is most readily available for us in our body are our heme products, so that from our from our animals. And then our non-heme is our plant-based, which is not as readily available in our body. So our body doesn't absorb it as well as it would if it was from our heme or our meat sources. So examples of both those. So for a heme, so our meat products, the top 5 or very high sources of iron are things from like liver, chicken liver. So not everyone does eat that, but that is a very good source of iron. Otherwise, red meat, pork, chicken, and then fish. So that can be like a salmon or tin tuna. They're our animal based that are really quite high in iron. For our non-heme, so for the vegetarian sources, we're looking at things like iron fortified cereals, so things like Wheat Bix and all brand, so they've got iron added to them, so they're quite good sources of iron. Other ones are tofu, legumes, so that's like kidney beans and lentils, rolled oats, and then nuts, so cashews and almonds are also good sources of our non-heme iron or our plant-based source irons. So it's definitely important that you are having a diet rich in these types of foods, whether you're vegetarian or not, making sure that we're having sources of iron. And then particularly if you are vegetarian or vegan, really focusing on making sure that we're having those non-heme foods in our diet to make sure that we are getting enough iron. And besides, just our food intake, there are other things that we can do to help boost our absorption of iron. And one of those things is adding vitamin C to our foods or our meals that we're having that have a good iron source. So that vitamin C does actually help optimize our absorption of iron in that meal or food that you're having. So this could look like pairing things like fruits and veg to that meal. So things like capsicums, tomatoes, broccolis, strawberries or other berries, orange juices or just orange and citrus are really, really good examples of adding what you can add to a meal. So for example, if you're having Wheat Bix, you could be adding strawberries or having some orange juice on the side to really help boost that absorption at that time. Another really good tip that might be helpful as well, although it's not necessarily something that is always able to be done, but there are some foods that are more of like that inhibitor, so they inhibit some of that absorption of iron. There are a few different substances and things like that, but not always able to remove it. But the things that I would recommend and that are very helpful is to have coffee, teas, and like alcohol or wine away from those meals or foods that you're having that are high in iron, just to sort of help stop stopping the absorption of the iron in that time. So this could mean having your tea or coffee away from breakfast time. If that's the time you would normally have it, you could wait 1 or 2 hours after or have it before. Just having that break away from the meal can definitely help stopping that iron absorption. Okay, so now that we know our requirements, we know where we can get iron and also how to optimize absorption, I'm going to talk a little bit about deficiency and the impact of it. So low iron or an anemia can cause many different symptoms. Some of them are dizziness, mental fatigue, mood disturbances, reduced appetite, low immunity. It can cause headaches, and it can even cause things such as like brittle nails, hair loss, and shortness of breath. That's particularly in pregnancy, and those are the more severe symptoms as well. So for an athlete, so speaking more on the athlete, if you're being very active or, do a lot of exercise, you are at a higher risk also of being iron deficient because you can lose iron through your sweat. So even if you're exercising recreationally, it's still important to be aware of that that's a possibility. To sort of just make sure that you are consuming adequate iron in your diet throughout your day. As I said, it's really important that you are consuming adequate iron, because if you do become low in iron or become anemic, it's definitely going to impact your performance. So as I said, some of those symptoms before, things like dizziness and being tired, particularly getting dizzy when you're changing, like lying down to standing up, loss of appetite, which can lead to under-eating, which definitely would impact our performance as well. So it's definitely something you wouldn't want to avoid as you are really, really active. Low moods, energy becomes lower, you have a decreased immunity, so more chance of getting sick, which can also impact performance, and then things like headaches as well. So it's definitely something you'd want to sort of avoid particularly if you're an endurance athlete. So, you're really, really active and you're moving quite a lot. That can definitely impact your performance. So definitely something that you want to be aware of and make sure that you are meeting your requirements and, making sure that you aren't low in iron. So besides people who are athletes, though, there are other groups that might be at high risk. So I did mention before very briefly about being a vegan or vegetarian. So you're obviously not having that meat source. So definitely want to make sure that you're aware and having those plant-based sources in your diet so that you are getting adequate iron in your diet. Other groups might be teenagers, because you may have just started your period, and that's something that to be aware of as well, to make sure you're optimizing that. Pregnancy, breastfeeding, if you're a regular blood donor, or if you have consistently or chronic restrictive diets, so you're consistently eating under eating, that can definitely also impact iron status. So something to be aware of. Other things that may be out of your control, though, are things like medications or other diseases or conditions as well that might impact your iron absorption and stores. So that's another thing to be aware of as well. So as a dietitian, we can help with overall increasing your dietary intake and looking at your overall diet and signs and symptoms, potentially picking up an iron deficiency. I did mention earlier as well with the blood tests, and I would come back to it, that finding out that if you are deficient, it needs to be done through a blood test. So you will need to see a GP or get a blood test, get your blood work done to test that blood if it is low in iron. And that's the only way that you can really truly know if you're deficient. So you do need those blood tests. And it's definitely something that I'd recommend, because if you are low, and a doctor may prescribe something like a supplement or potentially an iron infusion, but that would again need to be done through your doctor. It's also important because sometimes an iron deficiency is caused by a disease or a condition that may be sort of hiding that. So for example, if you have celiac disease, it may present, one of the presentations or signs and symptoms of that might be low iron. So you need to address the celiac disease rather than necessarily that low iron status. So it's definitely something that you would need to sort of go and consult a doctor with to make sure that there's no other things going on either. It's also recommended that you don't take a supplement unless it's clinically indicated either. So if you are taking one without necessarily knowing, that could also go one way as well. You don't really want to do that either. So really making sure that we're checking in there. So seeing a dietitian or a doctor or a healthcare practitioner to sort of really get some good advice on that. That's pretty much everything I wanted to cover today. So thanks everyone for listening. I hope you learned a little bit. If you wanted to ask any questions, you can ask them now. Otherwise, it was really, really awesome seeing you. A question just came through actually, Emily. Thank you. So at a high breakfast, like a high iron breakfast option, that's a really good question. So I did mention one before with the Wheat Bix. So Wheat Bix are quite high in iron, which is a really good one to try and have. Another one, if you do have plant sources, another one could be having 2 bits of grain bread with some baked beans. So baked beans are like a legume, so that's a really good one. And then you could also have a cup of spinach on the side there. And then if you'd like to add an egg, if you have if you have meat sources, adding an egg there, that's a really high iron. So in that alone, there's about 7 milligrams. So that's quite a lot. So yeah, 2 pieces of grain bread, some baked beans, half a can of baked beans, and a cup of spinach and an egg. That's a really good one. Otherwise, the wheat bix. So you could do a wheat bix or an all bran, and then you could have some sprinkle of like almonds or cashews. That's another really good source there as well. So yeah, there's lots of different ones if you have the cereals or if you're having meats and things, that's someone like that. So yeah, thanks Emily for that question. Let's build a menu. See, now we want a lunch option. Thanks. Okay, so lunch. So if you're having meat, so any meat sauce there. So it could be as simple as having a sandwich. So sandwich with some red meat or chicken. Definitely a good option. And then you're obviously having in that salad, you can add in those vitamin C veg. So things like capsicum or tomatoes. And that's in the sandwich, and then you've got your meat there, and that's a really good option. You could use tuna or fish as well in that. It can be a wrap as well. So that's one option. If you don't have meat, you could use something like tofu. So you could have like a salad with some like brown rice or some sort of grain, some salad again, that's adding in that vitamin C, and then you could have tofu or you could have legumes in there, and that's your plant-based option. And both are really good sources of your iron, and then they've got the vitamin C in there to really help that absorption. So that's another one, and I think that would also probably cross over to dinner as well. So yeah, there's some good menu options, and I hope thanks for that question, Seaton. But yeah, no, it was, if anyone has any more questions, pop them in. Otherwise, yeah, overall, for a summary, I'll do a little summary. So iron needs tofu, salad it is, and no coffee. Yes, that's right, Seaton. Have coffee a little bit earlier or a little bit after. But yeah, thanks for listening. Overall, iron needs do change throughout your life, so making sure that you are aware of that is definitely important, so you're eating enough. And particularly when you're starting your periods, of course, that does change. And then, yeah, it can obviously impact a lot of things in our life if we are too low. So really making sure that you're aware of those symptoms, checking them out if you're not too sure. And then, yeah, being aware of how it might impact your performance or sport performance is also important. And then pairing foods, as we've spoken about a little bit, with vitamin C, potentially having it away from coffee and things as well. So, Yes, Kate. So my mum's just actually commented, yes, you should have vitamin C for better absorption for iron. That does help absorb your iron. So having vitamin C with that definitely helps. So I would recommend that. So it could be as easy as having a salad, as I said before, some like capsicum, tomatoes. You could even have a glass of orange juice with that meal. So something like that with it, or a piece of fruit. And then, as I said before, having it away from coffee and tea might be an option if that's something that you might need to just help boost that as well. But yeah, that's all I wanted to come talk about. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. This will be posted on the page anyway. But yeah, I hope that you guys learned a little bit because it was a lot of fun. Thanks.